All right, we are live, and today might be, today's the last day at network school. We came here 3 weeks ago, and 3 weeks have passed by. I still remember one of my really good friends, he would say this thing where if you are in your routine in Vancouver, if you're in your routine, 3 weeks would pass by, and you would have no idea that 3 weeks just passed by. But when you're traveling, where you are on an adventure, everything moves so slow. Like these 3 weeks, it felt like a lifetime. It felt like we have gone through a lot. Yeah, we have gone through multiple different phases in just 3 weeks. This was incredible. First week, a phase. Second week, a phase. Third week was more resting and kind of figuring out a rhythm. And today, I just got back from the gym. This is the first time that I have hit the gym over here. But very interesting. All right, so we got Nietzsche, the madman. Have you not heard of that madman who lit a lantern in the bright morning hours, ran to the marketplace, and cried incessantly, I see God, I see God. As many of those who did not believe in God were standing around just then, he provoked much laughter. Has he got lost? Asked one. Did he lose his way like a child? Asked another. Or is he hiding? Is he afraid of us? Has he gone on a voyage? Emigrated? Thus they yelled and laughed. The madman jumped into their midst and pierced them. I think this is so interesting. It's like now you have to figure out that what do you really want? I really like my morning coffee. I really like morning coffee. I really like the morning breakfast. I want gym. So it's interesting. It's like trying to figure out that during the day, what do you want? I want the morning coffee. I want the I want the morning coffee, quiet peace. I want the breakfast. I want my NSTV where you are basically collaborating with a friend. I want my personal live stream. Maybe I think a nighttime live stream actually is pretty good. It's a great way to reflect. It's a great way to kind of figure out that, okay, how was it? And maybe this is also the time when you are kind of philosophical and you are looking for, um, yeah, you're kind of philosophical and you are looking for, okay, let me go as deep as possible. Let me go for a place where I can actually really talk. I don't know. There was a room over here where people were playing a certain game, and the game's rules were so complicated, and for some reason I didn't feel it. I didn't feel like being there, and I really enjoy engaging with reality. I really enjoy engaging with reality. I don't want to be passive. I think passivity is crazy because attending events is like scrolling through TikTok. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. The hype, the dopamine that you get from going from one post to another is the same dopamine you get from attending one event and going to the next event and just consuming new information. But it's also interesting because this new information you're at least getting from people who are in hyper reality. This also just makes me realize this entire concept. We were sitting on the terrace. We were sitting on the terrace and we were talking, and I'm talking with this guy, and we're talking about that. What is all technology trying to do? All the technology is trying to move towards this, is converging toward this point where it's able to create reality. Create reality. When we say create reality, that means exactly one is to one copy of reality. That's what is happening. That's what all the technologies are converging towards. Whether that's sound, whether that's VR, whether that's 3D, there's this idea of Gaussian splatting, and there's this idea of, and then we got grok images, which are really fast. So really fast, create bunch of alternate realities that look very real, then watch that in 3D, then add some sound to it that is real, then make sure all the hyper realistic, all the things are actually real, there are no errors, it actually operates like the real world. And it's very interesting. Hmm. God we're standing around. Just then he provoked much laughter. Has he got lost? Asked one. Did he lose his way like a child? Asked another. Or is he hiding? Is he afraid of us? Is he gone on a voyage? Emigrated us? They yelled and laughed. The madman jumped into their midst and pierced them with his eyes. Whither is God? He cried. I will tell you. We have killed him, you and I, all of us are his murderers. But did we do this? How could we drink up the sea? It was also interesting. Like today, I was having this another conversation with a friend, and it was all about network state. It was actually all around network state. That okay, we have this idea of reform or exit, right? The goal of exit is not that you never go back into the system. You exit the world, you become like a monk, and you are like, okay, I'm never gonna enter the real world now. No, that's not what exit is about. Exit is about the fact that the goal was to update the system, which means reform is updating the system from within. Exit is creating a new system from ground up, which how you want it to be, and then proving that this works better for people, and then switching to that system, which means you go back into reality, which means network state means you go back to San Francisco. But now that you have proven that your system works, you have convinced people that we should be vote us to bring this system to the cities. So that is what network state means, and it's very interesting. It is very interesting. It is very interesting, and I would this entire concept of risk taking, adventure. What did Friedrich Nietzsche, say about risk or taking risks? Today we read some Nietzsche, and that was pretty good. It felt really, yeah. You need to find silence. You need to find silence as well. You, it's amazing that you are around the right people. You are around people, that is amazing. But you also want to find silence. You also want to find a space where you also want to find silence. Nietzsche's most direct statement on risk comes from the gay science. The gay science, section 283. Can I find section 283? Morality as a problem. I don't see risk over here. The humanness of the future. The meaning of knowing, the evil hour. Every philosopher has probably had an evil hour when he thought, what do I matter if one does not accept my bad arguments too? And then some mischievous little bird flew past him and twittered, what do you matter? What do you matter? Wow. Wow. He issues what's become one of his signature exhortations. The secret for harvesting from existence the greatest fruitfulness and the greatest enjoyment is to live dangerously. Harvesting from existence the greatest fruitfulness and the greatest enjoyment is to live dangerously. Build your cities on the slopes of Vesuvius. Send your ships into uncharted seas. Live at war with your peers and yourselves. For Nietzsche, risk wasn't reckless thrill seeking, but a precondition for any life worth calling one's own. A corrective to what he saw as the herd's preference for safety, comfort, and predictable mediocrity. The theme runs throughout his work. In this book, Zarathustra, he describes humanity as a rope stretched between the animal and the Ubermensch, a rope over an abyss, insisting that what is great in man is that he is a bridge and not an end. The whole image turns on danger, crossing, falling, going under. Closely related is his famous line from Twilight of the Idols, what does not kill me makes me stronger. Wow. That's Kanye. Kanye was reading a lot of Nietzsche. Or a precondition for any life worth calling one's own, a corrective to what he saw as the herd's preference for safety, comfort, and predictable mediocrity. Yeah, this is interesting. Like when we chose this place, we didn't choose this place because it's safer. We didn't choose this place because this was more comfortable. We know it's not comfortable. We know it's not safe. We chose because this is risky, and we wanted risk, but we also wanted good risk. We want to know that we are fighting for something good. Corrected to what he saw as the herd's preference for safety, comfort, and predictable mediocrity. The theme runs throughout his work. In this book, Zarathustra he describes humanity as a rope stretched between the animal and the Ubermensch, a rope over an abyss, insisting that what is great in man is that he is a bridge and not an end. The whole image tones on danger, crossing, falling, going under, closely related to his is his famous line from Twilight of the Idols, "What does not kill me makes me stronger," often quoted glibly, but in context part of his argument that suffering and adversity willingly taken on are what produce depth of character. Suffering and adversity willingly taken on are what produce depth of character. Underneath these aphorisms sits a more substantive philosophical commitment. Nature thought modern European morality, shaped by Christianity and later by utilitarianism, had become essentially a project of risk elimination, minimizing suffering, smoothing edges, leveling people downward. Nietzsche thought modern European morality, shaped by Christianity and later by utilitarianism, had become essentially a project of risk elimination, minimizing suffering, smoothing edges, leveling people downward. Against this, he said ideas like amor fati, loving one's fate, including its hardships, and the will to power, the drive to overcome and expand rather than preserve. His free spirits and philosophers of the future in Beyond Good and Evil he calls Versucher, a German word that puns on attempters, experimenters, and tempters all at once. The philosopher worth the name, in his view, gambles with their own ideas and self. So Nietzsche's view of risk is bound up with his view of greatness. Nothing valuable, character, art, philosophy, meaningful life is reachable from inside a fortress. Is reachable for inside a fortress. If Nietzsche was alive today, what sort of risks would he be taking? How would he be living in this modern world? I'm really curious how Claude thinks through these things. Really curious, really curious. Fun thought experiment though, it comes with a caveat worth naming upfront. Nietzsche was a famously contradictory thinker who resists tidy projection. A lot of what would Nietzsche do speculation ends up being a Rorschach test for the speculator. Still, I have no idea what that means. What does that mean? Psychological experiment, you show someone an ambiguous ink blot and they tell you what they see. There's no correct answer. The point is that people project their own inner world onto it. So when the author says Nietzsche becomes a Rorschach test, means something like people don't really discover Nietzsche, they reveal themselves through how they interpret him. Same text, widely different readings. One person sees a project of individual freedom, another sees a critic of morality, someone else tries to turn him into a political mascot. A fourth sees a poet of self-overcoming. Him being so sharp, so open-ended, and so provocative that readers end up filling in the gaps with their own beliefs, biases, and desires. It's so interesting. It's like this entire idea that somebody romanticizing a certain life, that's easy. Tell me about living over here. Tell me about how can you create beauty over here where nobody would actually go and try to create beauty. Because most of the time people who are living, who might be living in beautiful places, they are not really happy. Very interesting. Very interesting. The first thing to note is that Nietzsche himself didn't live a conventionally adventurous life. He didn't sail uncharted seas or build cities on volcanoes. He was a chronically ill former philology professor who spent his productive years walking in the Alps, renting cheap rooms in Sils Maria and Turin, and writing. The risks he actually took were intellectual and psychological, abandoning a prestigious academic career at 34, breaking publicly with Wagner, his closest intellectual friendship, publishing books that almost nobody bought, attacking Christianity in a Christian Europe, and pushing his own thinking into territory that arguably contributed to his breakdown. So, when imagining a modern Nietzsche, the picture probably isn't a base jumper or a crypto trader. It's someone whose risks are aimed at intellectual independence and self overcoming. With that grounding, a few plausible threads would almost certainly be a pariah on social media or refuse it entirely. Nietzsche despises what he called the herd and reserves special contempt for journalists, public moralists, and people who form opinions by contagion. Twitter style outrage cycles, the performance of virtue, the way platforms reward conformity dressed up as dissent, all of this would strike him as the apotheosis of what he was diagnosing in the 1880s. He might use such tools tactically, the way he used aphorisms to detonate inside polite Victorian discourse, but he'd more likely retreat. The walks in the mountains were not incidental to his thinking. He would probably take aim at the contemporary forms of what he called slave morality. But it's generally hard to predict which forms. People on the political right often claim Nietzsche as an ally against progressive moral frameworks, and there's textual support for reading him that way. He loathed egalitarianism, pity as virtue, and movements organized around victimhood, but he was equally scathing about nationalism, anti Semitism. He broke with his sister in Wagner partly over this bourgeois respectability and Christian conservatism. A modern Nietzsche would likely find both major Western political tribes contemptible for different reasons and would say so in ways that made everyone uncomfortable. That itself is a risk, being unaffiliated in an age that demands affiliation. He would be deeply suspicious of comfort technology, the smartphone, algorithmic feeds, food delivery, dating apps, antidepressants, the general project of frictionless living. Nietzsche thought suffering and difficulty were generative, that a life optimized for ease produces what he called the last man, a creature who blinks and asks, what is love? What is creation? What is longing? And finds the questions tiresome. A living Nietzsche would probably not own much, would resist the dopamine economy, and would be suspicious of any pharmaceutical or technological promise to eliminate struggle. Though interestingly, he was an enthusiastic experimenter with his own health regimens, diets, climates, sleep, so he might be drawn to the more austere corners of contemporary self experimentation while mocking its Instagram friendly versions. You take physical risk of a particular kind, long solitary walks, mountain weather, fasting, cold. These were already his practices. He thought thinking happened in the body. Wow, I haven't gone for a really long walk. Long solitary walks, mountain weather, fasting, cold. These were already his practices. He thought thinking happened in the body and distrusted philosophy done sitting down. A modern Nietzsche probably wouldn't be skydiving, but he would be the person walking 30 kilometers alone in bad weather to work out a problem. The deepest risk, though, would be the same one he always took, thinking things through to their conclusions and saying them out loud, including the conclusions that horrify him and cost him friends. He called philosophers of his preferred kind researcher, attempters, experimenters, and meant that the genuine philosopher gambles with their own worldview, their own attachments, their own self in an era where intellectual life is increasingly mediated by institutions. Universities, media outlets, platforms that punish heterodoxy with social and economic consequences. The Nietzschean Risk is still the willingness to follow an argument where it goes and be wrong in public expensively rather than be safely correct. You would lose a lot of friends, you'd probably get cancelled at least once, you would write something the next century found indispensable. Worth noting in closing that Nietzsche has been claimed by everyone from existentialist to fascist to libertarian to postmodernist, often by cherry picking. Any sketch like this one is partial, and Nietzsche himself would probably mock it. All of that is written. I love only what a person has written with his blood. Secondhand Nietzscheanism. It's interesting. It's like today we read about Buddha, and Buddha wasn't a Buddhist. We created this idea of Buddhist that everything that Buddha did is Buddhist. So we should, if you're a Buddhist, you have to follow everything that Buddha did, but he's just a human. What if Nietzsche was a techno optimist in the modern world? How would that look like? What decisions would he take? How would he think? Whisper Flow is getting really good. Amazing work. Interesting counterfactual and a productive one, because making Nietzsche a techno optimist actually requires some real physical work rather than just a costume change. He had deep instincts that cut against techno optimism, suspicion of comfort, distrust of progress narratives, contempt for utility as a value, but also some that could plausibly be marshaled in its favor. The interesting version of this question is an imagine Nietzsche tweeting about AI. It's working out which of his actual commitments would have to do the load bearing work. The most plausible bridge runs through his concept of self overcoming and the Ubermensch. Nietzsche thought the human being was something to be surpassed. Man is a rope between animal and overman. And he was scathing about views that treated current humanity as a finished product to be preserved. Read in a certain light, this makes him a natural ally of anyone who thinks the human condition is raw material for transformation rather than a sacred given. Transhumanists have noticed this and tried to claim him. The philosopher Stefan Lorenz Sorgner has argued at length that Nietzsche's project and the transhumanist project share a structural commitment to human enhancement. So, a techno optimist Nietzsche would probably start here technology as the latest and most powerful instrument of self overcoming, the thing that finally lets us stop merely talking about surpassing ourselves and actually do it. From that root, the decisions and dispositions would follow. He would care about genetic engineering, neurotechnology, and longevity research, but in a very specific register, not the Silicon Valley pitch about curing aging soul as eliminating suffering. Would find that framing contemptible, since for him suffering is generative, and the desire to abolish it is the core of slave morality. Rather, he would be drawn to these technologies as tools for producing higher types of human being, greater capacity, intensity, depth, range. He'd probably be more interested in cognitive enhancement than in life extension. Life extension, because mere duration didn't impress him. He cared about what a life contained, not how long it ran. A Nietzschean biotech program would be embarrassed about wanting to make some people more, and would reject the egalitarian framing under which enhancement gets justified. We just want everyone to have access to baseline health. He would say openly what most enhancement advocates only say privately, that the point is excellence, and excellence is unequally distributed by design. He would be interested in AI, but probably not in the ways its current boosters are. The AI's productivity tool framing, AI that writes your emails, summarizes your meetings, handles the boring parts of your job, would strike him as the perfection of the last man's dream, maximal frictionlessness, the final outsourcing of the inner life. But AI is a generally alien intelligence, something that forces humans to reconceive what thinking is, what consciousness is, what we are. that he would find electrifying. He had a lifelong fascination with what stands outside the human and shows the human its limits. A techno optimist Nietzsche would probably be less excited about chatbots that flatter users and more excited about systems that are strange, demanding, and capable of making humans uncomfortable about their own cognition. He'd embrace risk taking technology in the literal sense. Space exploration would appeal to him directly. It's the modern version of send your ships into uncharted seas, and the early SpaceX style framing of becoming a multiplanetary species fits cleanly with his rhetoric of overcoming danger and refusing to settle. He would likely have contempt for the safety first regulatory mindset that treats every new technology as guilty until proven harmless. Probably side with builders over critics on most questions, not because he trusted builders particularly, but because he distrusted the psychology of the critic. Ressentiment, the inversion of frustrated will into moral disapproval of those who act. His decisions about how to live would shift accordingly. The actual Nietzsche walked in the Alps and rented cheap rooms, so techno optimist Nietzsche might still do those things. But he would be an early adopter of anything that genuinely expanded human capacity. He would experiment on himself. Nietzsche was already an inveterate self experimenter with diet, climate, and sleep, and would probably take this much further given modern tools. Nootropics, neurostimulation, sleep tracking, metabolic interventions, eventually genetic and neural ones, not as biohacker influencer content, but as serious self construction. He treat his own body and mind as a laboratory, which is what he already did. He would just have better instruments. The thinking would have a particular flavor. Standard techno optimism tends to be utilitarian and humanist underneath. It justifies new technology by appeal to reduce suffering, expanded welfare, democratized access. Nietzsche's version would reject all three justifications and offer a different one. He'd be on the side of builders without sharing their stated reasons. This makes his version of techno optimism harder to assimilate to either contemporary tribe. It's neither the EA flavored improved welfare for all sentient beings pitch nor the conservative preserve human nature pitch. It's frankly aristocratic, frankly developmental, and frankly indifferent to the question of whether everyone benefits. There's also real internal tension worth flagging because pretending it isn't there would be too tidy. Nietzsche's deepest worry about modernity was that it produced the last man, comfortable, satisfied, and curious, unable to give birth to a star. Most actually existing technology trends toward the last man, not away from him. It makes things easier, smoother, more entertaining, less demanding. A serious Nietzschean techno optimist would have to argue that this trend is contingent rather than essential. The technology can be developmental than an aesthetic, but isn't automatically. He'd be picking his fights carefully: pro enhancement, pro exploration, pro difficulty, anti convenience as end in itself, anti passive consumption, anti anything that medicates rather than transforms. That's not a comfortable position to hold consistently. And Nietzsche, being Nietzsche, he would hold it inconsistently and contradict himself in interesting ways. Pro enhancement, pro exploration, pro difficulty, anti convenience. The honest summary is that a techno optimist Nietzsche is possible, but only if you take the Ubermensch and self overcoming seriously as the engine and let everything else follow. Read him through the longevity and comfort lens of mainstream techno optimism, and you don't get Nietzsche, you get someone bearing his name. Read him through the self overcoming lens, and you get a strange, demanding, somewhat alarming techno optimism that almost nobody's currently selling. What would Nietzsche think about AI, and how would he operate in a world where everybody is dependent on the frontier models of AI? Risk becoming projection. That idea is genuinely interesting to think about through his lens because it touches several of his most life concerns at once. Lay on both sides honestly before saying which I think dominates. On one hand, AI represents an extraordinary expansion of human cognitive reach, exactly the kind of thing a thinker who cared about power, capacity, and overcoming should celebrate. Frontier models can hold more in working memory than any human, draw connections across domains some individual could master, and operate at scales that genuinely transcend biological limits. If Nietzsche's project is about surpassing the human, here is a tool that does so directly. He would also recognize something he understood deeply, that intelligence isn't a single thing, that rationality has been overrated by philosophers since Socrates, and that what we call thinking is stranger and more embodied than the rationalist tradition admits. Large language models, whatever they are alien enough to potentially force philosophy to reckon with these questions properly for the first time. On the other hand, the way AI is actually being adopted seems almost engineered to produce the condition he most feared, his concept of the last man, the creature who has discovered happiness through the elimination of struggle, who blinks and asks why anyone would bother with greatness when comfort is available, reads now like a prophecy of a particular kind of AI saturated life. Outsource the email, outsource the writing, outsource the thinking through of difficult problems, outsource the awkward conversation, the difficult creative decision, the moment of confusion that might have produced insight if you had stayed with it. Each individual outsourcing is rational. The aggregate is a person who has stopped doing any of the things that produce a self. This is the heart of what Nietzsche would say about dependence on frontier models, I think. He had a specific concept of self overcoming that required friction. You become someone by doing hard things badly, then less badly, then well, by being confused and pushing through, by formulating your own thoughts in your own clumsy words and gradually finding better ones. Crucially, this isn't just instrumental. The struggle isn't a regrettable cost paid by the eventual product, paid for the eventual product. The struggle is a production of the self. A finished essay written by AI and a finished essay written by you may look similar on the page, but only one of them has produced a thinker. Frontier models, used as most people use them, short circuit exactly this process. They give you the output without the formation. From a Nietzschean view, this isn't a productivity gain, it's a quite catastrophe in the development of human beings distributed across billions of small daily decisions to take the easier path. You'd be especially alert to the psychological dimension. One of his sharpest insights was that humans rarely admit when they have chosen comfort over greatness. Instead, they construct moral frameworks that flatter the choice. The herd doesn't say, I'm afraid of difficulty, it says, ambition is toxic, or rest is radical, or you should be kind to yourself. He would expect and find an entire emerging discourse around AI that frames cognitive outsourcing as wisdom. Work smarter, not harder. Free yourself for higher order thinking, which the user then doesn't do. Democratizing expertise. He would read this the way he read Christian humility, as the rationalization of weakness presented as virtue. The tell for him would be that the people making these arguments rarely seem to use the freed up cognitive bandwidth for anything in particular. The promise of higher order thinking is the alibi, the reality is more scrolling. How would he operate in such a world? I think the honest answer is by using it deliberately and selectively in ways most people wouldn't, and refusing it in places most people wouldn't think to refuse it. He would use it for what is generally good at: research breadth, finding interlocutors across history, stress testing arguments, encountering positions he hadn't considered. He was a voracious reader who would have killed for the ability to summon any text in any tradition on demand. He would also probably enjoy as a sparring partner, somehow something to argue with, especially because frontier models can be pushed into positions and made to defend them. That's the kind of intellectual exercise he valued, but he would refuse it categorically for the formation of his own thought and writing. Nietzsche's prose is doing something specific. It's a trace of a particular mind working at the limit of itself, and outsourcing any of that work would defeat the entire point. He would write his own sentences badly and then better, the way he always did. He would stay with his own confusions until they resolved or didn't. He would protect fiercely the part of cognition that is the self, and would view the temptation to let AI do that work as the most dangerous temptation of the era, precisely because it's so easy to give in to and so easy to justify. You can also pay attention to what dependence does to people. Nietzsche was unusually clear eyed about how habits shape character. All things are subject to interpretation. Whichever interpretation prevails at a given time is a function of power and not truth. We become what we repeatedly do, a generation that has never sat with a hard problem long enough to solve it, never written a paragraph it had to wrestle into existence, never formulated an opinion without checking what the model thinks first. That generation will be different from previous ones in ways that aren't fully visible yet. He'd be writing about this probably with some cruelty, because he was capable of cruelty when he thought the diagnosis required it. He'd be unpopular for it, which wouldn't bother him. The hardest question is what he would say to someone who responded fine, but I have a job and deadlines, and AI helps me meet them. I don't have the luxury of artisanal cognition. I think his answer would be unsentimental. He would say that this is exactly the bargain the lost man makes, and that calling it a necessity rather than a choice is part of the self deception. The deadlines aren't given by physics, they are products of an economy that has organized itself around the assumption that everyone will use these tools, which then makes using them feel mandatory. You can opt out at a cost. Whether the cost is worth paying depends on whether you think there's something at stake in being the author of your own thoughts. For Nietzsche, there obviously was. For most people, increasingly, there obviously isn't. He wouldn't argue people out of the bargain, he would just note who was making it and live differently. The generally uncomfortable possibility, and I think you would see this clearly, is that AI dependence might not feel like loss at all to most of the people experiencing it. The last man in his telling isn't miserable, he's satisfied. That's what makes the condition so hard to escape. The people in it have lost the faculty that would let them recognize what they have lost. A world in which everyone is cognitively dependent on frontier models and broadly content with the arrangement would be, by his lights, one of the most successful traps the species has ever built for itself. Not because the technology is evil, you would have no patience for that framing, but because humans, given a tool that lets them avoid the difficulty that produces them, will mostly take it and call the taking wisdom. Not AI itself, the human response to AI. Okay, debate me. I believe the future is in Southeast Asia because of how far your dollar can go and how free you feel and how the culture is of giving and sharing. A lot of work in your claim. Future for whom? For what? I'll assume you mean something like Southeast Asia is where a thoughtful person should be orienting their life and attention going forward. What in US your EU war can live well and check by Danang, Bali, Penang on a fraction of what the same life costs in San Francisco and London, but you are describing an arbitrage. An arbitrage is closed. The gap exists because of wage differentials that are already narrowing fast. Currency dynamics that can shift, and visa regimes that were designed for a pre-remote work era and are being re-returned in real time, often less favorably. More expensive in 5 years. Ho Chi Minh City rents in expat areas have risen sharply. Singapore was cheap once. The places that are cheap now are cheap partly because they haven't yet absorbed the wave of foreign money chasing this exact thesis. And once they do, you get the Lisbon problem where locals get priced out, resentment builds, and the thing that made the place attractive starts to erode. My dollar goes far here is also viewed from the other side. I'm part of a wealth differential that is reshaping this place. That's not a reason not to go, but complicates the framing of the place as simply a deal you are getting. I want to gently separate two things here because they often get conflated in expat discourse. There is the felt experience of freedom, fewer social obligations, looser enforcement of rules, novelty, the lightness of being a stranger, and there is actual structural freedom, meaning legal protections, political rights, recourse when things go wrong, generally varied on the second axis, and on most measures it offers less of it than where you are presumably coming from, not more. Press freedom is restricted across most of the region. Singapore is famously orderly, also limits on speech and assembly that would be unconstitutional in most Western democracies. Thailand has less majesty laws which that have jailed people for Facebook posts. Vietnam is a one party state. Indonesia has criminalized extramarital sex. The Philippines had a president who ran an extrajudicial drug war. Malaysia has caned people for alcohol. The freedom felt by a foreigner with a passport and savings is partly the freedom of not being subject to the constraints residents live under. That's worth being honest about. The feeling is real. It's just not it's just not quite freedom in the structural sense, and confusing the two leads to bad decisions when something goes wrong, a visa issue, a legal problem, a medical emergency, a political shift. On the culture of giving and sharing, generally true in many parts of the region, and one of the things that makes living there meaningful for a lot of people, but I would push on this in two ways. Warmth toward foreigners and warmth within the culture are different things, and visitors often experience the former and assume it reflects the latter, or assume they are being included in the latter when they are being treated as guests, a different and more conditional category. Second, generosity in lower income societies is partly a function of lower income. Strong reciprocity networks exist because formal safety nets don't, and people share because they will need to be shared with. As these societies grow wealthier, which they are doing rapidly, some of the texture changes. Bangkok in 2025 is not Bangkok in 1995. The communal warmth you're describing is real, but it's also in some places a phase. The older expats who have been there will tell you this. Now, the larger doubts. The future is a strong claim, and Southeast Asia has serious headwinds you haven't mentioned. Climate change hits the region disproportionately hard. Jakarta is sinking and being abandoned as capital. Bangkok faces several flood risks. Manila and Ho Chi Minh City are coastal and vulnerable. Much of the region faces extreme heat that's already making some outdoor work seasonally impossible. Air quality in major cities Jakarta, Hanoi, Bangkok during boarding season, KL is generally bad and getting worse. Demographics are turning Thailand. Demographics are turning. Thailand is aging fast. Vietnam will start aging soon. Only Indonesia and the Philippines here have favorable demographic trajectories long term. Geopolitically, the region sits in the most contested space on Earth, the South China Sea. Taiwan tensions, US China rivalry, and a serious conflict would be catastrophic for the places you would most want to be. None of this means don't go. It means the future is here is an oversimplification. The deeper version of your argument is probably right. The surface version is probably wrong. I think the genuine insight underneath your claim is something like the assumption that life in high cost Western cities is the default good life is wrong. Many people are happier, more present, and more alive somewhere with lower costs, slower rhythms, and warmer cultures. That's true and worth taking seriously, but it doesn't follow that Southeast Asia specifically is the future. The same argument supports parts of Latin America, Portugal, Eastern Europe, certain corners of Southern Africa. What Southeast Asia has going for it specifically right now is a particular combination of cost, infrastructure, English usability, and visa accessibility that has made it the dominant node of the digital nomad map. That combination is contingent and partially temporary. is itself a particular kind of consumer relationship to a place and tends not to produce the rooted, meaningful life people are usually actually looking for. The expats I have read about who seem generally thriving in Southeast Asia are mostly people who learned the language, married in, started something, took on real obligations, and stopped thinking of themselves as getting a deal. The ones who stay arbitrage minded, chasing cheaper, learn the language, married in, started something, took on real obligations. Because what they're looking for is an actual location. So I push you toward a more specific claim which part of Southeast Asia, for which purpose, with what level of commitment, and for whom. The strong version of your thesis I might actually agree with. Yeah, can you tell me about the expat activity for Americans who have left America maybe 20 years ago, maybe 10 years ago? Where have they been? What have the most successful expats done that have led to happiness? Ground this with some current data rather than just speculating. Searching the web. Right now, there's a lot of conversation on codex, so we'll also try codex very soon. Data and reporting here paint a clearer picture than the romance of expat life usually suggests. The patterns of what works are surprisingly consistent across very different destinations, where they actually went. The biggest destination for Americans who left in 2005 2015 window are not particularly exotic. Remains by far the largest single destination with somewhat between 1.2 1.6 million American expats concentrated in San Miguel, Merida, Lake Chapala, Puerto Vallarta, Mexico City, and Yucatan, Costa Rica, and Panama large retiree waves, especially Panama via its pensionado visa. The Big Four in Europe, France, Italy, Spain, Portugal absorbed a steady flow, with Portugal becoming the breakout story. The American expat population there grew by roughly 400% in 10 years, driven by the D7 visa and the now ending Golden Visa program. In Asia, the long running destinations were Thailand, Chiang Mai for the early digital nomad wave, Bangkok for the more established crowd, Japan mostly through teaching programs and corporate roles, and Singapore almost entirely corporate. Vietnam, Malaysia, and Bali came later, really 2015 onward. Taiwan and South Korea drew teachers. Around 23% of American expats are retirees, and 44% they say they plan to stay overseas indefinitely, which gives you a sense of their long term commitment level. The post 2016 wave shifted the map. Portugal exploded, Mexico City became the dominant Latin American hub for younger remote workers, replacing or supplementing Medellin, which had its moment. Eastern Europe started getting more attention. Prague, Krakow, Lisbon, adjacent cities like Porto, and more recently Albania, Estonia, Poland, and Romania. Lesser trodden European destinations, the pandemic accelerated everything. What the happy long term ones tend to have done, this is the more useful question. The patterns are clearer than people expect. Let me describe them honestly because some of them cut against the appeal of the lifestyle. Predictor of long term happiness is committing to one place rather than perpetually optimizing. The expats who are still happy at year 15 are almost always people who picked somewhere by year 3, stop comparing it to alternatives, and start accumulating the things that make a place home. Friendships of real depth, a daily rhythm, a neighborhood where they are recognized, ideally a partner or family. The ones who stayed in motion, Bali for a year, then Lisbon, then Mexico City, then Tbilisi, tend to be more visible. They post about it and less rooted. Some of them are generally happy with the lifestyle, but a lot of them are running an arbitrage that gets harder to sustain as they age. Many describe a kind of low grade loneliness that they didn't feel when it was new. The second predictor is language. It's almost impossible to have a real life in a place whose language you don't speak. Your social world is capped at other foreigners and the locals who speak English, both of which are filtered populations. The Americans who learned Portuguese in Portugal, Spanish in Mexico, Thai in Thailand, rarer, harder, but it happens. Italian in Italy. These are the ones who report feeling at home rather than feeling like guests. The ones who didn't, 15 years in, often describe still feeling outside something, even if they can't name it. Third is real stakes: work, business, marriage, kids, and local schools. Property they actually live in rather than rent indefinitely. An institution they are part of. Work, business, marriage, kids, and local schools. Property they actually live in rather than rent indefinitely. An institution they are part of. The unhappiest long term expats I've read about are usually people whose entire relationship with the country is consumer. They live there, but they don't do anything there that the country needed done. The happy ones are running businesses, raising kids, contributing to communities, doing creative work tied to the place. Research from the World Happiness Report on first generation migrants found expats often achieve happiness within 5 years and gain significantly compared to their pre move baseline. But the main reasons people fail to reach that level are social exclusion, homesickness, and unsuccessful socioeconomic assimilation, all of which point at the same thing: integration isn't optional. Fourth, and this one is uncomfortable, the happy ones are mostly not the ones who left primarily to escape. People who leave America because they are running from something: a bad relationship, financial collapse, political despair, personal failure, tend to find that the thing follows them because the thing is in them. People who leave because they are moving towards something specific: a partner, a project, a life they couldn't build at home but can build there, do better. A partner, a project, a life they couldn't build at home but they can build there. One finding in the migration and happiness literature is that people expressing a desire to migrate tend to be less happy on average, and their happiness can actually fall during the preparation period. The move itself doesn't fix the underlying state, the new life built well over years sometimes does. Financial cushion matters more than people admit. The expats who are still calm at year 15 mostly have either ongoing remote income that's well above local cost of living, real savings, a pension, successful local business. The ones who are scraping by on geographic arbitrage are vulnerable in ways that compound over time. Currency moves, visa changes, health crisis, aging. The romance of I live on 1500 a month in Chiang Mai works at 35 and doesn't work at 65. The happy long-term Mexico expats are mostly bilingual, often partnered with Mexicans, often running something: a restaurant, a B&B, an art gallery, a clinic. The happy long-term Thailand expats are mostly the ones who married Thai, learned at least conversational Thai, and built something. The never married, never learned the language, but Thai, a retiree archetype, is the cautionary tale, not the model. The happy, long term Portugal expats are largely people who fell in love with the actual place rather than the tax break and who are integrating. The wave that came purely for the golden visa is already partially leaving as the program winds down. The happy, long term Japan expats are almost universally fluent or near fluent and having the Japanese spouses or careers that anchor them. End up happy 10 or 20 years on are mostly people who took the move seriously as a life decision rather than a lifestyle decision. They committed to a specific place, learned the language, built real obligations, and stopped framing themselves as getting a deal. The ones who stayed in a lifestyle mode, chasing cost of living novelty vibes, tend to either come back, keep moving, or end up somewhere quietly stuck. And what about the Indians who migrate, who move to different places? Where do they find happiness? Do they finally come back home? One for the masters, one for the dame, one for the student who now has a degree to frame. ये जो देश है तेरा. So hey, just make way for the Indian. My priorities had a shift after completing a PhD and a few years of corporate job in the US. I'm now back home making my living as a writer and residing within 20 miles of my family. The rest make up for the high happiness factor. Who are thinking undecided or perhaps staying back, and good luck to all those who are back and finding the rhythm in the Indian ways once again. Fundamentally different from the American expat story, and the difference matters for your question. Americans abroad are mostly choosing a lifestyle, Indians abroad are mostly choosing an economic strategy, and within that strategy, there are two completely different streams that have almost nothing to do with each other except sharing a passport. The shape of where they have gone, India is the world's largest country of emigration, with approximately 18.5 residing outside their country of birth as of May 24. The top destinations are the UAE and the USA, each with about 3.2 million, followed by Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, largely partition era, and after Kuwait. After that, the order runs roughly UK, Canada, Oman, Australia, Singapore, Malaysia, with Germany and the Netherlands rising fast. Indians sent approximately 129.1 billion remittances back home, nearly double what flowed to Mexico, the second highest recipient. It tells you what the migration is for. The two streams are skilled professional migration to the West, US, UK, Canada, Australia, Singapore, Germany, increasing the Netherlands and Ireland, and labor migration to the Gulf, UAE, Saudi, Kuwait, Qatar, Oman, Bahrain. They're driven by different people, follow different paths, and end differently. The Gulf Stream, this is the larger flow numerically and the older one in modern form, going back to the 70s oil boom. The migrants are predominantly from Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Andhra, and parts of the north, historically men doing construction, service, retail, increasingly skilled trades, and middle management. The defining structural fact is that the Gulf states do not offer part of citizenship or even permanent residency for almost anyone. Kafala system ties workers to employers. Almost everyone goes home eventually. Happiness for Gulf workers isn't measured the way it is for someone choosing Lisbon. It's measured against the goal of the trip. The unhappy ones came back broken, dead, exploitative employers, families they didn't recognize after 15 years away. The Malayali return migrant has been a whole genre of Indian cinema for decades because the experience is so culturally embedded. Eventual return, and the question is what condition they return in. The Western stream mean when they say Indian diaspora in a contemporary sense, and it's a different story. The dominant pathway is education, followed by skilled work, undergrad, master in the US, UK, Canada, Australia, then H1B or equivalent, then permanent residency, then other citizenship. In the US, Indian Americans are the most educated and highest income immigrant group with significant representation in tech leadership. Canada has Indians as the largest migrant group, and Australia and New Zealand have also seen Indian migrants form a growing share of their immigrant populations. The UK has a long established community going back to partition and earlier. Language isn't the variable since here, since most have English, but integration, real stakes, and committed presence are. Will something businesses, career, families, communities not stop framing the move as provisional? Live for 30 years thinking they would eventually go back without ever doing so, and who consequently invested neither in going home nor in fully arriving where they were. Was a specific failure more unique to the diaspora, the parent who maintained the dream of return so long that by the time they could go, the children's lives were entirely in the new country, and going back meant leaving the kids. Leaving the kids, so they didn't, but they also never psychologically settled. Wow. The other strong pattern is that happiness correlates with how the person handled identity. The Indians who tried to fully assimilate the Indians who tried to fully assimilate at the cost of cultural ties often hit a wall in middle age, a sense of having traded away something they couldn't get back. The ones who tried to live entirely within diasporic Indian bubbles often raised children who felt neither Indian nor American, British, Canadian, and resented both. The ones who navigated something in between, keeping language, food, religious, or cultural practice meaningful at home while engaging generally with the host culture, tend to report the most settled lives. Second generation Indians, by most measures, are doing extraordinarily well economically and socially in the West, but identity work is real and ongoing for them. Will they come home? This is the part that's been changing fast and is generally interesting. Historically, the answer was very rarely, and mostly when old Indians settle abroad have very rarely returned home, and when they do, it tends to be late in life after most productive years have been spent abroad. But over roughly the last 15 years, a real reverse flow has emerged. Many of the world's top multinational companies have begun sending their top Indian minds to head their operations in India. And there has been a recent trend of highly qualified MBA graduates and IIT students returning to India for work. Wage differentials look different once you account for purchasing power and quality of life. Substantial returning professional population now, the pull factors are real. India's tech sector pays well in PPP terms. Family ties are strong, parents are aging, and for some, the cultural friction of being a minority in the West stops feeling worth it. Harder immigration politics in several Western countries, the sense among some that their kids would have richer lives growing up Indian in India than as second generation immigrants elsewhere. Ashoka Econ Society. But this is still a minority flow. The dominant pattern for the Western stream remains leave young, build a career, take citizenship, raise kids who are American, British, Canadian, Australian first, and Indian second, visit India often, never permanently move back. The OCI status, a sort of permanent visa, lets them maintain deep ties without giving up their adopted citizenship, has institutionalized this in between identity. And many Indians in the West treat it as their settled position. They are not coming home, they're keeping a door open. I think that's interesting, and where this connects back to the conversation we have been having is that the happiest Indians abroad and the happiest Americans abroad share more than you would think. Commit to a place, build real obligations, don't romanticize what you left or what you arrived at. Make peace with the trade off rather than trying to avoid it. The motivations for leaving are different. The American is mostly chasing lifestyle, the Indian is mostly chasing opportunity. But the underlying question of what makes a life feel like it has roots in the same one, the answer is also the same. Roots come from staying long enough to grow them, and from doing the unglamorous work of being present somewhere rather than perpetually optimizing across options. This is very interesting. Very interesting. What if you do both? You get the lifestyle and you get the opportunity. That's it. That's it. You're going to go for both. Why are you only going for one of them? Opportunity and lifestyle. That's the